For years, the public was told this never happened, but leaked data tells a very different story. For decades, radar screens aboard US Navy ships told a simple, predictable story. Commercial traffic followed known routes. Weather behaved within expectations. And anything unusual was quickly explained, filtered, or dismissed. Until something began to appear. Not once. Not twice. But again. And again. And again. The same radar return. The same shape. The same behavior. Different days. Different ships. Different operators. But the pattern never changed. At first, it was easy to ignore. Radar is not perfect. Electronic interference exists. Atmospheric conditions can create strange echoes. Every system accepts that. So the first appearance was logged, reviewed, and filed away. But then it came back. The second time, technicians recalibrated the system. The third time, they cross-checked with secondary sensors. The fourth time, they verified against weather data, sea clutter, and known traffic. Each time, the same result. The system was functioning normally. And the object was still there. This is where the story stops being about UFOs. And starts being about repetition. Because randomness does not repeat with precision. On radar, the object behaved unlike conventional aircraft. It didn't drift. It didn't wobble. It didn't degrade over distance. It appeared sharply defined, often clearer than surrounding contacts. And it did something radar operators immediately recognized as wrong. It stayed still. Relative to a moving ship. Relative to shifting patrol routes. Relative to changing conditions. The return remained fixed. As if anchored to a point in space that should not exist. Then came the turns. Not gradual arcs. Not banking curves. But instantaneous changes in direction. One sweep, the object moved east. The next sweep, it was moving south. No transition. No deceleration. No acceleration curve. Just a new vector. For trained radar operators, this was not strange. It was impossible. Physics is not optional. Inertia is not negotiable. Any object with mass must obey those rules. Yet this object behaved as if inertia did not apply. As days passed, more data accumulated. Altitude changes occurred between sweeps. From high elevation to near sea level. No descent path. No transitional phase. Just relocation. Even more unsettling was what didn't happen. No shockwaves. No turbulence. No atmospheric disturbance. The environment did not react. The object moved through air as if air were not there. At this stage, radar alone would still leave room for doubt. But radar was not alone. Other sensors began confirming the same contact. Different frequencies. Different platforms. Different angles. The same signature appeared across them all. This eliminated the most comforting explanation. That it was a glitch. Here, the central question emerged. Why does the same object keep appearing on US Navy radar? Not something similar. Not a class of objects. The same. If this were random interference, the signature would vary. If it were experimental human technology, testing would be controlled. If it were foreign technology, behavior would change in response to detection. But this object did none of that. It appeared. It moved. It disappeared. Then returned days later, unchanged. Repetition implies intent. And intent implies agency. As more detections occurred, analysts noticed something else. The locations mattered. The object did not appear everywhere. It favored specific patrol zones. Strategic areas. Heavily monitored regions. Places where advanced systems were already watching. Almost as if detection itself was part of the interaction. And yet, despite repeated confirmation, something strange happened. Nothing escalated. No interception attempts. No aggressive maneuvers. No official alarms. Just continued observation. This restraint created a quiet conflict inside the system. Because military doctrine is built around response. Detect. Identify. Engage. But here, the process stalled. Detection happened. Identification failed. And engagement never occurred. Why? Because engaging something you do not understand creates consequences you cannot control. As weeks turned into months, the object continued to return. Same behavior. Same capabilities. No evolution. No degradation. No adaptation. It did not behave like a prototype. It behaved like a finished system. This realization shifted internal thinking. If the object was stable, it was not experimental. If it was not experimental, it was not new. And if it was not new, how long had it been there? At this point, explanations began to fracture. Some suggested advanced foreign drones. Others pointed to exotic atmospheric phenomena. A few quietly admitted none of those fit the data. Because no known natural phenomenon produces instant directional changes, perfectly stable radar signatures, seamless altitude shifts, repeated appearance in controlled zones, all at once. Here is where contradiction entered the story. Publicly, statements remained calm. Privately, certainty collapsed. The Navy did not deny the detections, but it did not explain them either. The language became careful, unidentified, unresolved, under review, again and again. Why acknowledge repetition, but avoid interpretation? Because interpretation creates obligation, and obligation forces decisions. Declaring the object hostile would demand action. Declaring it human would demand accountability. Declaring it foreign would demand escalation. And declaring it unknown would demand humility. Silence became the only option that preserved control. But silence carries weight. Because the object kept returning. And every return reinforced the same message. This was not an accident. The repetition changed how the system functioned. Not dramatically. Subtly. Watch schedules adjusted. Monitoring increased. Certain regions received more attention. Not because something was expected to attack, but because something was expected to appear. Preparedness replaced certainty. And with that shift came the deepest tension of all. The realization that humanity might not be the most advanced actor in its own environment. Not threatened. Not invaded. But observed. At this point, pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, if you were responsible for national security, and the same unknown object kept appearing on your radar, without hostility, without explanation, would you announce it? Or would you wait? If you're following this story so far, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments, do you think repetition means surveillance, coincidence, or something else entirely? Because what comes next goes even deeper. The most unsettling thing about the repeated radar detections was not how strange the object behaved. It was how calmly the system learned to live with it. At some point, the anomaly stopped being treated as an emergency. It became background. Not ignored. Not dismissed. Managed. Radar operators learned what patterns to expect. Analysts stopped asking if it would appear, and started noting when. Briefings mentioned it without urgency. The object had not attacked, had not interfered, had not communicated. It simply appeared, and left. Again. And again. This is where the story changes shape. Because repetition without hostility forces a different kind of conclusion. If something wanted to harm you, it wouldn't announce itself repeatedly without escalation. If something wanted to test you, it would provoke a response. But this object did neither. It observed. That realization created a deeper conflict. Because observation implies intent, but not necessarily aggression. Military systems are designed around threats. Clear threats demand action. Ambiguous presence does not. And ambiguity is dangerous, not because it is violent, but because it erodes certainty. As the months passed, analysts began to understand something uncomfortable. The object was not reacting to the Navy. It was indifferent to it. The object did not evade detection. It did not hide. In some cases, it seemed almost cooperative. Appearing at detectable ranges. Maintaining stable signatures. Leaving before interception. As if it knew exactly where the line was. This raised a question few were willing to say out loud. What if the object wasn't being tracked? What if it was allowing itself to be tracked? At this point, explanations fractured completely. Foreign technology? Unlikely. No nation tests secret platforms by repeatedly exposing them to the world's most advanced surveillance. Natural phenomenon? Impossible. No known atmospheric process produces controlled, repeatable, intelligent movement. Experimental US technology? Even less likely. Testing classified assets against your own fleet creates unnecessary risk and exposure. Every explanation collapsed under the same weight. Repetition. Repetition suggests stability. Stability suggests maturity. And maturity suggests time. Which leads to the most uncomfortable implication of all. What if the object didn't arrive? What if it had always been there? This idea began to quietly reshape internal thinking. Not officially, not publicly, but conceptually. Perhaps the object was not a visitor. Perhaps it was part of an environment humans had only recently learned how to see. Radar changed everything. Before radar, the sky was mystery. After radar, the sky became data. But data does not guarantee understanding. Sometimes it only reveals how blind you were before. As repetition continued, strategic thinking evolved. The object was categorized, not by origin, but by behavior. Non-hostile, non-communicative, persistent. That combination is rare and deeply unsettling because it suggests coexistence. Coexistence means you are not the dominant presence. It means you are sharing space. This realization did not trigger panic. It triggered restraint. Because escalation without understanding is how disasters begin. Silence became policy. Not denial. Not cover-up. But postponement. Postponement protects flexibility. It allows systems to adapt quietly. To prepare. To wait. And waiting is exactly what the object seemed comfortable doing. Over time, repetition lost its shock value. The anomaly became familiar. Not normal, but expected. And expectation changes psychology. Human beings are conditioned to respond to novelty. But repetition dulls urgency. And once urgency fades, mysteries lose their power to demand answers. This is why public attention drifted. Not because the phenomenon stopped, but because nothing dramatic happened. No invasion. No contact. No catastrophe. Just presence. And presence without narrative is difficult to sustain in public consciousness. But inside the system, the impact remained. Because unresolved patterns change doctrine. They influence training. They alter assumptions. They introduce humility. The Navy did not need to understand what the object was to understand what it wasn't. It wasn't human technology. It wasn't natural. And it wasn't hostile. That left only one category. Unknown, but intentional. This forced a philosophical shift. For centuries, technological superiority implied control. Radar, satellites, sensors. Visibility meant dominance. But here was something visible that could not be controlled. This inversion shook a foundational belief. That knowing equals power. In this case, knowing created restraint. The more data accumulated, the less confident conclusions became. Because every new detection reinforced the same truth. The object did not adapt. It did not escalate. It did not retreat. It behaved as if time did not matter. This long-term consistency suggests patience. And patience implies perspective. Now ask yourself, what kind of intelligence is patient on a scale humans barely perceive? Here is where the ocean enters the story. Because many of the repeated radar appearances occurred near maritime zones. Near deep water. Near areas where tracking transitions from air to sea become difficult. In some cases, the object vanished near the ocean surface. No descent path. No splash. Just disappearance. If radar loses contact at the ocean boundary, where did the object go? This question changes everything. Because if the object transitioned into the ocean, then the sky was never the full story. And if the ocean is involved, then the mystery is not extraterrestrial in the way people imagine. It becomes terrestrial, hidden, layered. This possibility reframes repetition. The object does not keep returning. It keeps passing through zones humans monitor intensely. Through spaces where detection briefly intersects with something that normally remains unseen. Radar doesn't summon the object. Radar reveals it. Which may explain why repetition coincides with advanced surveillance. The more we watch, the more we notice. And notice creates awareness. But awareness does not equal understanding. This leads to the final, uncomfortable realization. The same UFO keeps appearing on US Navy radar. Because it never left. It is not visiting. It is not scouting. It is not probing. It is simply existing. And existence does not require explanation. Before we end, ask yourself one final question. If humanity is not alone in its own environment, but also not threatened, what does that say about our place in the hierarchy of intelligence? Now I want to hear from you. Do you think repetition means surveillance, coexistence, a hidden terrestrial system, or something we still don't have language for? Leave your theory in the comments. Like this video if you believe some mysteries remain unsolved for a reason. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue exploring what others avoid.